Hello, popcorn junkies. How art thou? On the weekend where everyone's going to see Smile 2 and they're drowning their sorrows about Joker, Folie à Dieu. What a folie à Dieu it was. Even Terrifier 3 has done better. Now listen, I wanted to see Terrifier 3 this week, but it seems to have come off at virtually every cinema in London. Can you believe it? It was on for a week. So, this is a terrifying, or a review of another Terrifier. Or could you say this is the third film in as many weeks about a clown? This is a review of The Apprentice. This is a sort of the origin story, if you like, of Donald Trump's kind of emergence into the retail estate world, into the character that we've all come to know him and understand him to be. And what were those influences? What was his family makeup? Who were the influences on him at a much younger age? This is a film directed by Ali Abbasi. He did a film called Holy Spider. He's an Iranian filmmaker, and Holy Spider was a really sort of efficient and chilling and thought-provoking Iranian film about a serial killer. And he's also directed a couple of episodes from The Last of Us season 1, and they're quite notable, the ones that he's directed. He's quite a capable pair of hands. He has quite an authorial voice. So as I say, the star Sebastian Stan. Who is Sebastian Stan? Well, Sebastian Stan, you might know him from Tommy and Pammy, I think, where he played Tommy Lee, Pamela Anderson's boyfriend, with the speaking penis. Yeah, he was also the Winter Soldier from all the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He was also a brilliant villain in that film Fresh, starring alongside Daisy Edgar Jones. It also stars Jeremy Strong. He from Succession, playing Roy Cohn, who was a lawyer, who was a crucial part of the Donald Trump story, a man who, you could argue, and this film suggests, not only took him under his wing, led by example insofar as he was brutal, he was ruthless, he said never admit defeat, he said always have the killer instinct, he manipulated court cases, he got things his way by essentially blackmailing everyone. A deeply dark and twisted character, Roy Cohn, but with a fascinating kind of character arc in this film, played by Jeremy Strong. And alongside them, the other sort of big name in this is Maria Bakalova, who you'll know from Borat. She was nominated for an Oscar, or Borat 2. She's playing Ivana Trump. So I went into this film, just to be honest, I went into this film thinking, this ain't going to be great. We didn't react to the trailer even, or did we? I don't think we did. There was something about this that felt potentially cheap and potentially kind of like it was just going to be a bit of a hatchet job. I mean, one of the things I struggle with is I'm not a Republican and I'm not a Democrat. I find American politics curious and odd and bizarre, and we've been kind of following them and talking about them on the channel elsewhere. I'm certainly not a Democrat. I find the political system in America is so inherently sort of corrupt in a sense because it's all driven by money. Part of me was worried that this would just be another sort of attack on Donald Trump. And to be fair, Donald Trump himself has said this is atrocious, what a crock of shit. He tried to get the film stopped. He said it's terrible that they can make films with the crock of lies and allegations that aren't true, etc., etc. He's damned everyone who's involved with it, and he hopes that the whole film fails and is a dismal failure, seeing it as an attack, a political attack. So I went in thinking not a lot of this film. I came out of this film, just to give you a sort of frontal heads up, I came out of this film thinking, wow, that was a really interesting film. This film surprised me. This film wasn't the car crash I was expecting it to be. Now, let me explain the first elements of this film that kind of worked for me. Stylistically, it's really interesting. It's a kind of archival kind of fusion of obviously dramatic stuff that Ali Abbasi has shot in the present day. It's been treated to look old, but it meshes really nicely with period footage from the 80s. It's a very, very convincing kind of archival led thing. The grade and grain and feel of the film all the way through it, if you look at it in extreme close-up, and I always like to sit at the front of the cinema, you can see even the lines of sort of 1970s television. You know, it's almost like everything, it's like the whole thing has been passed through a cathode. It starts with footage of Richard Nixon, so it parks us firmly within the kind of great American tradition of lying presidents. And then it proceeds to tell us from the ground up, if you like. It's not from cradle to grave, but we pick up the Donald Trump story pretty much, I think he's in his 20s. He's at the point where he's still knocking around on the doors of Trump Village, which is a kind of set of tenement blocks his father's built, and he's getting the rent off people, but he's getting boiling water thrown at him, he's getting abuse, it's shit, it's an unglamorous job. And there were so many elements of this film where I thought, of course it's true, and it says it's based on true people, but some of the situations and the conversations have been fictionalized. It's one of those classics. So we don't know if any of these conversations happened, but we do know that these relationships and these characters existed. What I did find fascinating was the idea that Donald Trump was basically a door-to-door landlord at one point. So, you know, literally from the bottom all the way up to Trump Tower. And in a sense, if you need a kind of chronology here, it is from Trump Village, knocking on the doors, getting rent off people who can't afford it, all the way up to him building and unveiling Trump Tower. But really, this is a portrait not only of Donald Trump's ascendancy, if you like, it's also a portrait of his relationship, very close relationship with Roy Cohn. And I think while Sebastian Stan, I think, is actually very, very good in this, because what he's got to do in all those early years of the Trump character's sort of life, he gives us just the right, because of course Donald Trump, the caricature of Donald Trump, the man who needs to build a wall, and he's just the most bigly, most beautiful, it's a wonderful thing, and I just don't know what to say, because my mouth just always goes back to a puckering cat's anus. He became that. He wasn't always like that. But you can see the kind of pre-echoes or the suggestions of what Donald Trump would become. All those cadences, all those mannerisms, all those twitches and tics that we now know so well. Sebastian Stan does a really good job of just parking the right amount of them in the much younger Trump, so you feel this is a young Trump. Alongside him, he meets very early on Jeremy Strong's character, Roy Cohn. Now, Roy Cohn, the lawyer, I didn't realise he was one of the leading lawyers in the McCarthy trials. He was responsible for seeking out and destroying and blacklisting and then prosecuting many communists in America during the McCarthy trials. So he was a very, very driven, dark and twisted, and interesting, because what they park in the Roy Cohn character is really the DNA of Make America Great Again. This idea that you can lie, break the law, cut deals, blackmail, and behave amorally and immorally in service of the idea of American democracy. And I think that is the curious detail at the heart of this film, because what you see in Donald Trump today is everything this film suggests he learned from Roy Cohn, the Jeremy Strong character. At first, you think Jeremy Strong is playing this because, you know, Jeremy Strong is a real method actor, isn't he? He goes deep into it. He's very monotone, he's very one note, he's very brutal. He's almost like a sort of, not living dead, but he's almost like an automaton. He's gay. This is set in the 80s. There's a lot of kind of disco music, club music. There's a lot of orgies and parties. We witness Donald Trump coming into this world, connecting up with Roy Cohn because he knows Roy Cohn has got influence and he's got connections. Donald Trump does this. We see one scene in which Donald Trump has a couple of glasses of vodka and is sick everywhere. We get given the kind of background that he doesn't drink. We get given the story of his brother, his elder brother Fred, I think it was, Donald Trump's brother, who tragically took his life or died due to his alcoholism. So, you know, you've got some real kind of detail there. You meet the character of Donald Trump's mother and father, the demonstrative father, the father who wants to suggest that everything that any of his kids achieves is his achievement. In fact, the father of Donald Trump makes Fred an alcoholic because he tells him that just because he's a pilot, which for most people would be an ambition in and of itself, he essentially says, you drive buses with wings. He's so belittling. A lot of this film, and I'm going to get to the scenes towards the end, which Donald Trump is most unhappy about, but a lot of this film did a curiously, I don't think biased job at all, but honest job of telling us where Donald Trump came from. So whenever you try and however much you dislike a character, however much you don't like a villain or someone like that, it's really important to understand they come from they are humans, and what will have made the person what they are will have come from normal impulses and other experiences, etc., etc. And I thought what was really revelatory about this film, and quite eye-opening about this film, was actually sitting down and allowing myself, and it allowing me to indulge in, weirdly, the process of really humanising Donald Trump, certainly the younger Donald Trump. By the end of this film, don't get me wrong, he's the Donald Trump we all know and loathe or love. He's very sort of cold, he's very calculated, it's the deal, it's all about the deal, everything's about the deal. Emotions keep being knocked off and pushed to the side. But you see a younger Donald Trump here. But really interesting is his relationship with this Roy Cohn character, because Roy Cohn, played by Jeremy Strong, is the guy who essentially manages to, through recording chats with, meetings with, having orgies at his house, he has compromising material, photographs of mayors and senators and major people in the civic kind of offices of New York. He has footage of them having gay sex. He has footage of them asking for money and loans and all this kind of stuff. And what Roy Cohn essentially does is, through all sorts of dodgy dealings, he manages to get the New York state to kind of green light so many of Donald Trump's completely outlandish and financially insane and more leveraged kind of whacked out projects to build more and more buildings all over New York. So you get a sense of how Donald Trump's empire was built on and founded upon hot air and leveraged finance everywhere. And you also get a sense of where Donald Trump has learnt this idea of never admit defeat, never admit defeat. I mean, that's why he will never admit that he's lost an election. Roy Cohn, this film suggests that Roy Cohn created Donald Trump. Now, and if there's a problem with that in this film, it's the idea that in a weird way, it kind of gives him an excuse. It kind of pulls him off the hook. It kind of allows you to kind of not forgive, but if you can find an explanation, and if you can sort of lay it at the feet of Roy Cohn's the reason Donald Trump's an absolute psychopath and sociopath. He learned from this older guy who, and this is the most interesting part of all of it. What I find fascinating, there's even a moment in this film where Roy Cohn, who's gay, he doesn't admit to being gay. At the end of his life, Roy Cohn died of, a condition or illnesses aggravated or brought about by AIDS. There's a moment where Roy Cohn touches Donald Trump's leg when they first meet in this members club at the beginning of the film, where, Donald Trump's kind of like, trying to kind of ingratiate himself with people. There's no suggestion that Donald Trump necessarily had sex or anything like that. But Roy Cohn, admittedly, incredibly sort of patriotic, deal breaker, monetary, a lawyer, a go-getter, vicious. Obviously, he's thrown all the communists in America in prison, so he's a right kind of proper Republican too. But he's also gay, and he also has kind of orgies and all this kind of stuff. The idea that Donald Trump was even close to someone like this, or that someone like that from that world could have been so formative in the creation of the Donald Trump we know today. Some of this film's most interesting moments were watching Sebastian Stan's Donald Trump in the much later years, trying to rationalise and deal with his inherent prejudices and his homophobia around the fact that Roy Cohn, this guy who he really does owe everything to, is gay. And not only gay, but he's got the gay disease of the 1980s. So this was surprisingly another really interesting sort of shard or fleck or detail to the whole 80s AIDS gay scene kind of epidemic thing. And the arc, I have to say, Jeremy Strong, at first I found him he's a bit samey, he's a bit mannered. But by the end, this brutal, this vicious, this selfish, this sinister guy who's sort of iron and flinty becomes this weak, emaciated, dying of AIDS character that Donald Trump in the end realizes he has to kind of mark his life in some way. So Donald Trump invites him to Mar-a-Lago, or his place down in Miami, this tasteless place. He wheels Jeremy Strong in, Roy Cohn in on a wheelchair. He hands him some cufflinks, which he says is a gift for his birthday. He kind of knows he's going to die, but the cufflinks aren't even made of real gold or real whatever. They're not real diamonds, and they always say Trump on them. And so you had this curious final dinner and this relationship, this curious kind of sparring, codependent relationship between Donald Trump, this man we all think of as he would not court a gay person, and yet a gay person was crucial in the defining features of what makes Donald Trump today. Maria Bakalova deserves a really strong shout out. She plays Ivana Trump, and she doesn't have many scenes, but the scenes that she is in, she doesn't play Ivana as a victim, though Ivana clearly is, at one particularly contentious scene in this film, a victim, in which she, at the point in their relationship, marriage, where he's essentially lost interest in her, he's been drawn to more and more other women, even though he's bought her breasts, he's got bored of her, because, and she tries to sort of charm him with a book about the G-spot and having sex, and then there's a scene where it's a very brutal scene, a really disturbing scene where he rapes her. This is the scene that Donald Trump has obviously taken great umbrage with. Ivana Trump apparently did declare that this happened in court. She then did deny it out of court. So whether it happened in exactly the way it was shown, one only knows. But she played, I thought, Ivana Trump in a very sort of authentic and incredibly kind of sympathetic manner, because she herself, Ivana Trump, I remember she used to be on chat shows. She was quite a cold and quite a sort of, she would hold your arm's length in her personality. But you felt her kind of fall for him. You could see what she fell for in him. She wasn't just interested in money, though there's an incredibly tense and very successful scene where Jeremy Strong's getting her to sign a prenup with Donald Trump there. And I thought there were just some really interesting dynamic scenes. The acting in this is sensational. The soundtrack is odd. The soundtrack at times was giving me a sense of, I was getting a sort of Uncut Gems vibe to this. And the great thing about Uncut Gems, a film by the Safdie brothers starring Adam Sandler, is that he's an entirely unlikable and really horrible character that you're not rooting for, and yet what's so clever about Uncut Gems is it makes you root for him. I'd say this film does something very, very similar. I don't like Donald Trump. You like him less and less as you go, but this could speak to something that I think is a real dilemma and problem for the Democrats and for Americans and for people who don't like and don't want Donald Trump to win the election. I found myself in this film strangely charmed by him and drawn to him and kind of wanting him to succeed in that way that you do within the film. There were a lot of kind of moments dropped in there where does he nick the Make America Great Again kind of moniker from Ronald Reagan, or maybe people know in America that that's exactly what Ronald Reagan said and he's reused it again. There are references to him possibly running for election, though he talks about it as if it's madness, as if it's a kind of, a pipe dream. This is a really interesting film. I found it thought-provoking. I found it engaging. I thought Sebastian Stan, it's more than just an impersonation. You do get those complicated moments where you're presented with experiences that Donald Trump went through that must have been challenging, and you see the Donald Trump of now becoming the Donald Trump of now in the way that he deals with it. So, for example, when his brother dies and he gets onto the gilt gold bed, Ivana's next to him, Ivana's pregnant, and she tries to be sensitive with him. She just says to him to cry. He's so cold. He's so sort of tells her to not look at him. Don't look at me. Don't touch me. And you can see the kind of the shell being, the iron shell, the shell of kind of emotionlessness being built in these scenes and in these moments. And so whether we like it or not, within the Donald Trump we all see and know now, there is a human. And this film doesn't try to make us feel sympathetic about him, but it just presents to us the fact that this is some of the DNA. Look at some of the DNA that's gone into making this guy. And what you also notice is that so much of what he's drawn to and what his politics are purely opportunistic. The idea that he wants to support the Democrats and then he supported the Republicans. He's just after whatever wins for Donald Trump. And if that means he's pro-abortion, anti-abortion, he will shift at all times. His ruthlessness around his brother kicked in. His ruthlessness around his father kicked in as he tried to kind of get his father, as his father was getting old and infirm, to sign away the trust fund so that he could get more money to leverage the debt that Trump's raising to build all these buildings. It had Uncut Gems about it. It had a sort of vibrancy about it. It was an archival piece. It was a sort of historical piece. But I have to say, the strength of this film is that the three key main actors give it everything. I found it eminently believable. This wasn't an impersonation, and this was a really interesting tragedy. I mean, in a weird way, the character of Roy Cohn is as strong and as compelling in this film as the origin story is of Sebastian Stan's Donald Trump. So I would fully recommend going to check this out. I found it incredibly entertaining. And as I say, the music had a tone to it that was both, it also reminded me a little bit of the Jackie Onassis film. It was kind of threatening, chilling, and then within it you had moments of 1980s dance and disco. So it was a good era piece as well. I found it really enjoyable. So if I was to give this a score, I would give this film, unusually and surprisingly, I was completely shocked, I'd give it 78. No, I'd give it, 78 out of 100. Well worth the visit, well worth the watch.